So just as a bonus, I wanted to rank the movies of Oztober Year 1. And part of that is because I wanted to, just in case you guys ever wanted to check these movies or shows out for yourself, then you'll know kind of where they fell on my scale of quality. And also that way you can hopefully check them out and decide for yourself. Now, in terms of the quality rankings, generally the way that I do it is the ones at the bottom have the fewest good things in them, and then the ones at the top have the most good things in them, or the highest quality good things, because bad ultimately is the absence of good. So that's why certain ones are going to fall where they fall. And all this is just my personal opinion. You may agree, you may not. But if you're going to check out just how vast the land of Oz is on film and television, hopefully this will help you to know where to start. So number 31 is the missing Oz films. Reason being they're missing. I can't really talk about them in great depth, but consider that more of an honorable mentions section. I just wanted to give them a shout out just in case they should ever resurface partially or in full. And because I wanted to touch on the larger subject of missing silent movies, which is a tragically common thing. Most silent films that were made during that time period, they're not there to be viewed anymore because they got destroyed or they got misplaced or whatever. Film preservation was not a thing for a good long time, especially not in the early days of cinema. So yeah, that's part of why the ones that are still around, they are so loved and revered. On top of just being really great films like, the Fritz Lang's German Expressionist films and Charlie Chaplin movies, things like that. But I did want to give them a shout out, and I wanted to talk about that larger subject, because Oztober, as you can tell, not only was it a kind of a history of Oz films and TV shows, but it was also somewhat of a history of film at the same time, history of culture, that kind of stuff. So you kind of get it all, but I wanted to place that in there and give them their time in the sun. Number 30, After the Wizard. Now you talk about the absence of good. After the Wizard, like I said in the video, it's just a creative vacuum, There's very little about it that's really good. And I feel bad saying that because, I was hoping it was a diamond in the rough. I was hoping that I could maybe lift it up and help give some of the filmmakers, the cast and crew, hoping I could maybe, give them more exposure, more of a shout out, but I really can't because it's just not a good movie. It just isn't. And again, I'm not there to stomp them down or anything, but it's it's just not good. And there's very little about it that's redeemable. Now, granted, the stuff that's bad in it is not nearly as severe as some of these other ones that we're going to be looking at, but it's the absence of good, because even the ones that had the most severely bad things in them, they had a few redeemable things in them. After the Wizard really is like a creative void. It's a desert. There's next to nothing in it that's redeemable, and it's just not well directed, it's not well acted, it's not well produced, it's just nothing really. After the Wizard. Number 29, The Witches of Oz. After the Wizard had next to nothing good in it, and this does have a few things that are semi-decent in it, but unlike After the Wizard, The Witches of Oz is 164 minutes, which is almost 3 hours long, because it is a mini-series after all. And I'll say this, the stuff that's not good in this movie is insufferable, particularly because it is so bloody long. And again, it should be a lot better than it is, and I'm not expecting anything necessarily masterpiece worthy. I was at least hoping for so bad it's good, or epically stupid, because it's made by Lee Scott, and like I said in the video, he's an Asylum alumni. And Asylum movies, at the very least, they're cheap. They ride on the coattails of bigger movies and franchises and that kind of stuff. But at the very least, they tend to be so epically ridiculous that you can't help but love them. And they are keeping independent exploitation movies alive. But it's just, you would hope for so much more. And if it were to fail, you would at least hope that the journey there would be so amazingly dumb that you can't help but love it, or something so epically stupid like Sharknado or something like that. But we don't really get that here, and it doesn't help that with all the well-known people that are in this, and they're just phoning it in. And again, it's like you would just hope that they would like go for it, that they would do like a Nicolas Cage kind of, just play it to the nth degree and make us all, thankful for having watched just how epically dumb it was. But no, it's way too long. It's way too convoluted. I don't know, it's insufferable to sit through. Number 28, The Muppets Wizard of Oz. Now, a lot of you are probably surprised that this isn't at the very bottom, but hopefully my reasoning about the absence of good and all that kind of stuff helps explain why it's here. Now, it's still at the very bottom, pretty much, but like I said in the video, this did have just the ever so slightly redeemable things about it. Because I do love the Muppets so much. I'll say this. This does have just the slightest few redeemable things about it, but out of all the movies I watched, this one hurt me the most because I love the Muppets so much. This really should have been up there with Muppet Treasure Island or Muppet Christmas Carol. It really should have been up there, but it just wasn't. And in fact, this is probably the worst Muppet-related thing I've ever seen. I have not seen Kermit's Swamp Years. I haven't seen some of the more obscure stuff. I'm talking about like the major, well-known canon of the Muppets. This movie, it really does make me angry every time I think about it, because I look forward to this. When this aired on ABC, I looked forward to it. I watched it. I had actually moved cross-country just the 2 years prior. The last Muppet movie that came out in theaters was Muppets from Space, which I loved as a kid. And I still like it now, even though most people don't. But it was like, whatever it was, like 12 years until another Muppet movie on the big screen came out. And then in between that time, we get this, and it's just so insufferable to sit through because of how man, they talk about a fall from grace. The Muppets totally fell from grace with this thing, and outside of the 2011 movie, they've only gotten partway back up to where they should be. Man, this just this disappointed me so much. It still hurts to think about today, but again, just being objective, there are the slightest few things about it that make it better than the other ones on the list so far. They did adapt the book, and they hit a lot of moments that the 1939 film didn't hit. So at the very least, it was nice to see them do that. And it's done badly, but at the very least, it is the Muppets doing their thing. So we at least have that. But it's just, man, wasted potential. That's all I can say. Number 27 is Shirley Temple's The Land of Oz. Now, you talk about wasted potential. I think that one also counts, although, again, that one wasn't like as much of a personal thing for me, because obviously I wasn't alive in 1960. It's just, I don't know, it could have been a lot more than it really was. Again, so one thing that tends to bother me is when you have stars that have done really great work in the past and are capable of so much more, and they don't really try. That, for me, that gets under my skin. I can respect nobodies who maybe don't necessarily do as good a job, but at least they're trying. I don't really like it when they don't obviously try, and I know that they can do more because they're famous for a reason, presumably. And also just the production values on this thing. I know it is a TV budget. I know that it's, the early days of television, and the fact that it exists and that it's in color and all that stuff. I mean, that's kind of amazing in and of itself. It's just kind of an oddity from the period. I do not recommend it. Number 26, His Majesty, the Scarecrow of Oz. Probably the worst of the Oz film manufacturing company's output during the 1910s. It's definitely the most jumbled. I There's just not a lot to say about it, to be honest. I mean, all the Oz film manufacturing companies' films, they don't really have the greatest narratives, but again, I have to kind of grade that on a curve because at that point in film history, movies were still largely sideshow attractions, and they weren't really true art forms yet. So, outside until you hit like The Birth of a Nation and Intolerance, both D.W. Griffith films. Around that point is when cinema as we know it today, in terms of the storytelling structure and the form of motion pictures, that was when that really started to get formulated. Prior to that, everything was very experimental. But even grading on that curve, there's just not a lot to write home about with this particular one outside of the scene with the Tin Man cutting the witch's head off, which is, again, best Tin Man of all time for that reason alone. For me personally, my favorite out of Dorothy's companions was always the Tin Man, and I always wanted to see him just go nuts with the axe and like cut people's heads off and that kind of stuff. And then finally, we have a version of the Tin Man where he does that. So at the very least, it has that. Did the Muppets Wizard of Oz have that? I don't think so. Number 25 is Journey Back to Oz. That one, man, so I found like this really low quality version of it on YouTube. So if you notice in that video, the video quality is noticeably awful because that was all I could find at the time. The DVD was ridiculously expensive, and as you saw, at least to me, when I saw the actual movie, it was like, this isn't worth like at least 40 to... Some of them were like, they range from like 40 to $80 just for a DVD. And it's like, sorry, but this just is not worth it. This movie is, again, it's not like absolutely awful or anything. It's just, it is like trying to be a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, but outside of maybe one or two songs, there's just not a lot to write home about with Journey Back to Oz, except for the cast, which I mentioned in the video. It is pretty cool to see kind of that cinematic passing of the torch and Liza Minnelli stepping into the shoes, quite literally, stepping into the shoes of her mother, and doing a good job of it for Dorothy. I just, again, I feel like it should have been more relative to who worked on it. And it feels way too Saturday morning television. And I know it came out prior to, well, no, they had Saturday morning cartoons in 1972. But, it's just, I feel like it's something that should have been on TV. And in fact, it did achieve success on television, and it makes sense because that's what it looks like. That's what it feels like. And if you were to see it just in that environment, then you might enjoy it okay if you didn't have to like pay for it. Or, because your expectations would be a lot lower than if you were to pay money to see it in a theater. When you have to pay money to see it in a theater, it's like, it better blow you away. And it doesn't. Now, as like a kind of distraction on a Saturday morning, you could do a lot worse, but, just especially relative to all these other ones that I talked about, it's just not really worth it, sorry. Number 24 is the 1982 Wizard of Oz, the first anime that we looked at. Really, at this point in the countdown, this is where we start to get into some of those ones that are not like horrible, but they're just not extraordinary and they're kind of forgettable. The 1982 version from Japan, it had a few interesting things about it, like with Dorothy being a blonde and the whole pie thing, which I thought was funny. For whatever reason, but it's just, there's not a lot about it that really stands out. Now, I did take that opportunity to talk more about some of the cultural ties between Oz and Japan and that kind of stuff, which I think is important because there are some interesting parallels there, but just as a piece of art, you could do without it, really. Number 23, Turkish Wizard of Oz. Now, there are definitely people that are really into Turksploitation films and into weird exploitation films just in general. I was kind of surprised with that film how it did base it a lot more off the book than it did off the movie. I totally expected it to just rip everything from the 1939 film, because Turkish exploitation movies, they tend to rip off movies pretty shamelessly. But no, it actually was a halfway decent adaptation of the book in terms of like specific events that the 1939 film didn't cover. And I did love the wizard that looks like an actual wizard, in like the most cartoony version of a wizard, most literal translation of a wizard that could possibly be. But yeah, I mean, it's only really interesting if you're a connoisseur of some of that weird cinema from around the world, that sort of stuff. But it was a halfway decent adaptation. It's very awkward. It's very bizarre. The humor doesn't really translate. And I say humor, I said in the video that it was like with comedies around the world, they tend not to translate when you have to jump from language to language. And that is true. I wouldn't really call this movie a comedy per se, but there are some humorous moments that don't really translate, and just they come off as strange and awkward. And then the cinema snob who I referenced in the video would often review Turksploitation films. He would review strange, bizarre, like semi-porn or full-blown porn films from the 70s, and in the absence of things that make you laugh or the things that just make you scratch your head, it's like, okay, are these people gonna get up to any weird, possibly lewd business, especially with the dwarves that are all around Dorothy and are just so, like, gushing with love for her. And it's like, oh man, this is gonna get weird, isn't it? But no, it's for a certain type of person, they might appreciate Turkish Wizard of Oz, just if you want something really bizarre. Number 22, The Wonderful Land of Oz from 1969. I'm surprised that this ranked as high as it did, because when I was first, I did not watch these in the order that I put them on. I ordered them chronologically. This was one of the first that I watched that I hadn't already seen before, and at that time it ranked pretty low. But as I was watching these other movies, it rose up the list for the simple reason that, yeah, it's not good. The acting's really bad. The sets are really cheap. The camera angles are really flat and stiff, and all that stuff. But at the very least, they tried. They tried. They had no big names. They had very little talent. All that stuff. But they did try, and I can respect the level of effort be more than anything. And it was a halfway decent adaptation. I'm not kidding. Out of all the Marvelous Land of Oz adaptations, that one probably followed the book the closest. Yeah, it wasn't technically a good movie, but the fact of the matter is they did try, and the end result is kind of so bad it's good, because there are a lot of moments that can be made fun of and can be laughed at. And part of that could have been because I watched the Riff Tracks version, which I would recommend watching that version, because if you were to just watch it on its own, you could probably laugh at it yourself. But then having the riffers do it, Mike Nelson and etc., and his contemporaries, they can probably help get you through it, because otherwise it might just come off as strange and awkward, which, I mean, it does anyway. But again, at the very least, they tried, and I can respect the level of effort in a way that I can't respect with people who should know better and who are capable of better. Number 21, Lost in Oz from 2002. This is kind of a weird one, because I think the pilot in and of itself, like, it's okay. Like, right now we're getting into the okay territory. I think the 2002 Lost in Oz, it is okay. Maybe it could have gone in some interesting directions had it been able to get more than just one episode. It's nothing amazing. It is very standard in a lot of ways. The video quality for the version I watched on YouTube was really poor, but I guess that's to be expected. But yeah, I think I would hope that it could have gone in more interesting directions, but yeah, the finished product, it's just okay. There's nothing about it that's especially amazing outside the sound of the soundtrack, as I mentioned before. I don't even know, because again, I don't know if it aired or not, so I don't know if those songs were officially licensed or maybe they were temporary songs that they picked. I don't know. I want to say that they probably were officially licensed and selected, but nonetheless, it doesn't really stand out relative to like Smallville and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, Supernatural, which would come along later. Any of those WB/CW teen shows, doesn't really stand out relative to those. And that's clearly who it's going for, but just as far as a standard like young person fighting evil and that kind of stuff, I've seen worse, but yeah, it's okay. Number 20, Legends of Oz, Dorothy's Return. So just a little trivia here. This cover right here, this is actually a custom cover that I found it online as a DVD version, and then I adjusted it to fit a Blu-ray case. Now, what I've observed with this movie is that it bombed at the box office, the critical reviews were terrible, the user ratings on different review sites and things like that are pretty good for like just the average user. And so I assume that must mean that people discovered it later, maybe when they didn't have to pay full theatrical admission to see it, and maybe they could rent it from the library or from a streaming platform or something like that. In which case, you could do a lot worse. The animation is decent, it's not quite theatrical quality, but it's better than a lot of direct-to-video stuff. I think what gets me about this movie, and maybe got a lot of people who reviewed it at the time, was kind of the hubris of the people who made it, that they had like merchandise, they had toys, they thought that it was going to spawn a whole bunch of sequels, they thought it was going to be a big franchise, that it could possibly compete with Disney and that kind of stuff. But meanwhile, they're raising money in all kinds of fishy ways. So I think you could definitely criticize it as far as like a work of hubris, for sure. But I think just the work in and of itself, you could do a lot worse, but you could also do a lot better. And just the fact that they expected it to play in theaters and be able to compete, that says a lot. Number 19 is The Patchwork Girl of Oz, which was the first of the Oz Film Manufacturing Company films. I really love the stop motion bit with the Patchwork Girl coming together. The performer, the person who played the Patchwork Girl, was actually a man and was a gymnast and acrobat, if I remember correctly. That person did a lot of really amazing cartwheels and very, very good physical performance, that kind of stuff. It had the Woozy, which was from the Oz books. It is significant insofar as, it did help get Oz on screen in the most official way possible, because it was L. Frank Baum doing it himself. So that's part of what makes it rise up the list, plus just the fact that like the stop motion is still impressive to look at today, and the fact that it exists at all is pretty amazing. So it's more up there just because of its significance and history and kind of where things led after that. And again, the greatest character introduction in cinematic history. What else do I need to say? Number 18 is Tom and Jerry and the Wizard of Oz, which again, one of the worst titles I've ever encountered in my time, and a really lazy concept. In execution, it's quite a bit better than I thought it would be. It's still not amazing or anything. That's why it's... I originally had this ranked higher, but then I really thought about it, and I was like, well, the only things about it that are at all interesting is everything having to do with Tom and Jerry, which if that's what you're into, if that's what you're looking for, then great, because it's a decent representation of who they are. But as far as Oz movies goes, it's only interesting in that we see a lot of these same events from the 1939 film, but from a different perspective, and that's why I brought up Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. So it's only really significant in that respect, but just in and of itself, everything outside of Tom and Jerry just doing their thing, everything else about it is just the same movie done over again, but animated and not done as well. So that's kind of why it fell down the list a little bit. But again, not terrible, and in fact, pretty charming if you go into it for the right reasons. All right, number 17 is The Wonderful Galaxy of Oz, and since recording the episode, I actually have acquired a copy of the DVD. Now, you notice that it's a dollar DVD because it's in the really slim case. It's like got this tear down here. It's obviously a piece of crap. And I would get a complete series dub or a complete series sub if that existed. Maybe there's a bootleg of it or something. I don't know. I did want to see the full series, but as far as I could tell, it doesn't exist in English. I couldn't find like a Japanese one either. So yeah, if anybody can send me a link to that or something, then I'd love to check it out. The feature film version, I couldn't really tell if it was trimming a lot of the fat to make it more of like a lean experience, or if it was leaving out a lot of stuff that would have been interesting to see. Again, I can't really say, but just taking this in and of itself, it's definitely an oddity, but again, it could have been a lot worse just given the premise of it. The novelty is that it's in space, and you got the wizard being a boy and being an older man with his father. You got Plant Man instead of the Scarecrow. You got the Tin Man equivalent is with Dorothy from the beginning, so it has some interesting things about it. But it just in and of itself, like it makes me wish I could see the whole thing in its intended form. I mean, I sat through all of the Witches of Oz, all nearly 3 hours of it, as excruciating as it was. I did want to see the full thing. I did not see the shortened Dorothy and the Witches of Oz, which cuts out about an hour. But I do wish I could have seen the full thing, but just in and of itself, it definitely stands out. It's a lot more conceptually interesting than a lot of these other films. Again, saw it on YouTube, but since then I did acquire the DVD, as crappy as it is, really. All right, so number 16 is The Steam Engines of Oz. Now, story-wise, this one has more to it than some of these other ones, which is why it ranked higher. Animation-wise, Legends of Oz looks better than this. This would not Legends of Oz could somewhat play in a theater, not well, because then you see like Frozen or a Pixar movie or something like that, something of the period. You put it next to it, and it's like, yeah, this doesn't compare. This would not have survived in a theater. This is clearly meant to be direct-to-video, but they knew that. That's the difference. They didn't try to put this into theaters, and they didn't think that it could play alongside other mainstream type of movies. This is definitely more okay with being a niche thing, and I just like the fact that Arcana, that they made their comic, but then they also made their own version of their own property. I think that's really cool. I want to see more companies do that if they have the means to do it. I think in and of itself, it's not like amazing, other than I like some of those later Oz stories that set the Land of Oz like hundreds of years into the future, and you see how much the land has grown up, and how in this case it's steampunk, it's embraced greater forms of technology than what we saw in the first story, that kind of stuff. I think that's really cool, and I just love the look of the Scarecrow. I love the look of the Tin Man. I love the fact that the Tin Man is a dictator because he doesn't have his heart. I think that's a really cool thing. Outside of that, honestly, it's not really extraordinary outside of the conceptual level. And I really don't think that the average person will necessarily get into it, but it does stand out relative to some of these other ones, at least on a conceptual level. Number 15 is The Magic Cloak of Oz. I'm giving it a pretty high ranking, all things considered, because of the restoration effort that was on the Oz Connections YouTube channel. The restoration looks beautiful. I loved everything having to do with Fred Woodward as the donkey. I loved the Cowardly Lion. I loved all the animal antics and that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mostly was giving it because of the how good the restoration effort was, and just the fact that most people don't care about silent movies, and that's really sad. But just the fact that they restored it, they restored some footage, they are trying to keep it alive. Like that to me deserves a shout out there. Number 14 is The Wizard of Oz 3: Dorothy Goes to Hell. I saw that film many years ago. I did not watch it like when it was brand new or anything. Maybe I want to say around 2012, maybe a little bit later. But when I was getting into AVGN and getting into James Rolfe, I saw it and I thought it was absolutely nuts. I do find it kind of sad that movies that are internet-based things that are that crazy and that kind of South Park-ish and that attempting to be, insane and outrageous and that kind of stuff, I don't think they would necessarily be tolerated today. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe it's in a different corner of YouTube or whatever, I don't know. I suspect not, just because YouTube and just the culture in general is so eager to find fault with things and to find excuses to shut things down and shut people down and that kind of stuff. But it did take me back in time, because I remembered in the early days of the internet, it really was kind of the Wild West, and people were just throwing stuff at the wall to see what stuck. And I don't know, I like the fact that, especially because it was animated, it was like, yeah, James and Mike could just throw everything that they wanted at the wall and just make the most insane movie of all time, that wasn't, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, wasn't a trauma movie, wasn't anything like that. But yeah, I don't know, it just makes me smile, because I can imagine people that are on Twitter nowadays, if they were to see that for the first time, their heads would explode, but I don't know, it made me smile. Number 13 is The Wizard of Oz from 1925. Yeah, you may be shocked that it ranks up that highly. Well, again, it's not. I wish that it had been one of the L. Frank Baum ones that ranked up so highly, but again, they don't really tell that complete of a story, and they feel much more like proofs of concept. The 1925 version, as inaccurate to the book and as wildly detracting from the source material as it is, it does tell a complete story, and it's pretty solid as far as a silent comedy goes, outside of the racist parts and outside of some gags that don't really work and some of the more head-scratching decisions. Horrible adaptation, but, well, I guess it's a little bit like Tom and Jerry and The Wizard of Oz. Horrible adaptation, but in execution could have been a whole lot worse in terms of like delivering silent comedy, silent slapstick comedy, wacky comedy from that period. Could have been a whole lot worse, and just the fact that it was Larry Seaman, I don't know how you say it, but the fact that it was him and not any of the big comedy stars from that period that was doing it, it's like, this is kind of a diamond in the rough of that period. I could easily see it going alongside other comedy films from that era. Now, would it necessarily be that great? It would not rank that highly relative to those other ones done by the silent masters, but it's just kind of neat to know that it exists, if you're into that sort of thing. If just as an Oz adaptation, it's probably the worst adaptation of much of anything that I can think of. The only thing that it reminds me of in terms of adaptations, the only thing it reminds me of, honestly, is the Super Mario Brothers movie, in terms of like just how far can you get from the source material, like how far can you stray. But yeah, just as a movie, it is fairly decent just for what it is, if you can accept it, and if you like that style of comedy. But again, it's so of its time, and like when I saw the one guy, the African American guy eating the watermelon, I was just like, that was the ultimate face palm, because like that's up there with like censored 11 type territory. I'm like, ugh, the 20s. But anyway, yeah, you could do a lot worse as far as silent comedies go, but in terms of adaptations, probably one of the worst I've ever seen. So again, difference between good movie and good adaptation. Number 12 is The Wonderful Wizard of Oz from 1910. I watched the commentary version on the Oz Connection, and Erica Oliveira, and she had someone else on there. They didn't really like that one very much. Now, it is a short film. It's like about 10 minutes, so it's heavily compressed. In terms of the sets and the overall presentation, I thought it was actually better than the Oz Film Manufacturing Company ones, even though it was made by Otis Turner and it wasn't L. Frank Baum doing it himself. But it did give me what I wanted from... that was kind of what I was hoping the 1925 version would be like, but on a bigger, longer scale. I wanted the story, but I wanted it in a silent version, and I wanted some of that magic that comes from silent movies. I wanted that to come through. Now, again, it's only 10 minutes, but in that period of time, you really get the sense of what silent films could do that sound films couldn't do. There is a magic to it. There's a hypnotic kind of otherworldly quality that they have, and experiencing the story in that way, even if it is heavily compressed, I don't know, it just kind of took my breath away, to be honest. I may be the only one. I know, again, a lot of people don't like silent movies these days, but I don't know, it kind of gave me what I was hoping it would be. But, you know, again, I would have liked it if you'd have had the 1925 version with its full length, but in that same style, then we really would have had something special. But for what it is, it's like, I don't know, I thought it gave me what I wanted. I just felt bad that the L. Frank Baum ones didn't rank higher, especially because I like the fact that the author had a hand in bringing his creation to life in some way. But, you know, it was based on the, whatever I said, the early 1900s musical, which, given that the 1939 film is so well known now, I think it would be really cool if you could take some of those old songs from that most people have never heard. I've never heard them. I think it'd be cool to stage that and just see how it stacks up relative to the songs that we all know. Number 11 is Tom and Jerry Back to Oz. I kept saying Back in Oz in the video, but no, it's Back to Oz. I am as surprised as you that this ranked as highly as it did. I did not think that it would, because usually these... it's a sequel to a direct-to-video movie that was in and of itself like basically a cash grab that somehow ended up better than anybody thought it would. But it had Paul Dini writing it, and it's a direct sequel to the 1939 film, and it's like... because everybody that's ever seen the 1939 film, we all have wondered what a sequel would be like. This is about as close as we're gonna get, and I'm taking Return to Oz out of the equation, because the only thing that movie had was the ruby slippers, which they had to pay a fee to MGM to use. Outside of that, I mean, Dorothy's a whole other age. She's much younger. The designs aren't remotely the same as the 1939 version. It follows the books closer in style and tone and that kind of stuff. This actually uses the iconography of the 1939 film. So it's like, yeah, I'm considering this much more of a sequel than Return to Oz. Return to Oz I don't count as a sequel because it's not the same studio. It's not anything like that. So it did scratch that itch. It finally is like, hey, we get to see what the rest of Oz in this universe, in this version of it, would look like, at least in animated form. But again, for people that are just Tom and Jerry fans, they would probably hate this because they're barely... Now, they're in it plenty, but they just don't do nearly as much of the wacky antics as you would hope they would. But it was really cool to see like a 1930s inspired design for the Gnome King and for the gnomes. The songs are not really good outside of like the Jitterbug, which was already written for the 1939 film that they brought back, and the way that they incorporate it into the narrative is really, really interesting. The Jitterbug himself looks a lot like the Mask, because he's got the zoot suit, which I guess was period appropriate. But yeah, I surprisingly really enjoyed this one, much more than the first one, which is not to say I didn't enjoy the first one, but this gave me what I was hoping for. It was a lot more new things. I wanted new things. And it did actually kind of help fill a few gaps, because like Dorothy says that she's like nearly 15 and that kind of stuff, so that kind of helped to explain why she looks older than like Firuza Balk was like 11, or that sort of thing. But like Judy Garland's obviously not 11, so that kind of helped explain that a little bit more. And some of the like you saw the mice carrying them, which happened in the book. Just some of those little incidents that the 1939 film cut out, they were able to put back into this. And honestly, I was glad that it did not. For once, I was glad that it didn't really touch on the Marvelous Land of Oz or Ozma of Oz's story points. Like, it just takes the 1939 film and just does a direct sequel to that, which is kind of refreshing, to be honest. Because, again, my brain was hurting from how many Marvelous Land of Oz adaptations we had. But yeah, it was, I don't know, it gave me what I wanted. And I suspect that fans of the 1939 film could really get into this. But people who are just Tom and Jerry fans will probably hate it, because they don't factor into the plot that much, not nearly as much as they did in the first one. All right, now we are getting to the top 10, and the number 10 spot goes to The Wiz. Yeah, you probably think I hate this movie, but no, I don't. I liked it enough for it to be in the top 10. This was one of the longer videos in the series, and part of it was just because it gave me a lot to talk about, and I did kind of rip into some of the things about it that have aged really poorly, which again, I'm not someone that I don't jump on the bandwagon of, oh, that's dated, or, oh, this offends me because it doesn't hold up to our standards of today, that sort of thing. I'm not that kind of person, because I'm very much a believer in educating yourself about the time in which something's made versus how we would do it now, all that stuff. That's what I tried to bring to this. It just stuck out to me more for the simple reason that The Wizard of Oz is a timeless story, and this is so painfully of its time. That being said, it does stick out a little bit more because The Wizard of Oz is a timeless story, and when you're constantly reminded of the time in which something is set, then it kind of detracts from that. But again, it is in the number 10 spot because the stuff that's good in it is really, really good. I mean, Diana Ross is very, very miscast as Dorothy, just in the abstract. I mean, obviously they rewrite a lot to try to accommodate that, but it is still Diana Ross. I mean, she was a superstar, and obviously she can sing well, she can do the dances, she can, do everything you'd want her to do. Michael Jackson, of course, this was right when, this was right at the cusp of his solo career really taking off. And so you get to see like why people fell in love with him and why his solo career did take off. I do kind of wish that they'd have had him dance more. Obviously, it might have been difficult because he wears really big shoes. But he does dance quite a bit once he gets off his pole, from being the Scarecrow. But again, the stuff that's good in it is really good, and I didn't really emphasize it in the video as much as I would have liked. But it's like the sets are really, really good. It's a visually stunning film to watch. The music is great, and generally they're performed really well. And Nipsey Russell's isn't the best Tin Man, but I believe that the Cowardly Lion in this carried over from the stage version. But like, I don't know, the music's great, the sets are great. I don't really like a lot of the creative choices they made as far as like making it New York, but crazy and run down and like a bomb hit it. I don't really like that, but just execution-wise, it does look really great. All the criticisms I had were more about what it had the potential to be and how we would do it now. But again, what's there is pretty strong relative to the time. It's aged very poorly, and a lot of it does come off as kind of racist now. Unintentionally so. It would not have been considered that in 1978. But at the same time, again, judging by the standards of the time, I can see why it has fans, but I can also see why it does have plenty of detractors. So I do, but I do think the stuff that's good in it is really, really good and obviously strong enough to be in the top 10. Number 9 is Oz the Great and Powerful. I did not plan on this episode being the longest one of the series. The stuff that's good in this stands out among the rest. So that's part of why I ranked it so highly. If you were to just compare this to just any other big blockbuster type movie, then at best it's okay. But again, the stuff that's good in it relative to other Oz adaptations ranks really high. I mean, the Land of Oz looks unbelievable in this. It is a magical world that they create, kind of on the cartoony side, obviously. But I mean, technologically, they use the medium of film in its modern incarnation with 3D and with the widescreen and CGI. They use all of that to its fullest potential, which is really cool to witness. I did not expect for it to yield as many talking points in terms of story as it did, but it just so happened that, again, this is trying to communicate what I think is a more complex message than it can necessarily deliver in a simple way. That's kind of why I was expounding on it a little bit more and talking about the fact that someone who's in a position of great power, like a wizard or a ruler of some kind, inevitably they're going to be flawed human beings, because every single ruler in history has been flawed, but the good ones are able to inspire people in spite of their flaws. And then I listed all the famous historical figures who are admired to various degrees, who said and did some pretty heinous things, some of which have haunted them more than others. But I brought that up not as a way to condone or excuse them, but just more so to show that people can be admired and can still have said and done really horrible things, and you could flip that around. People that are mostly known as being horrible, you might find one or two things that they're like, oh, look at that, they did something good. It doesn't excuse the vast majority of their behavior, but, it just shows my point, which is that human beings are ultimately a mixture of good and evil. It's just what percentage of it do they ultimately fall into that makes them worthy of admiration or not. And even then, every human being has to have a giant asterisk next to them, because everybody has done something that's horrible, even Mr. Rogers. Number 8 is Oz, a rock and roll road movie, also known as 20th Century Oz. If there was an official release that I could find on DVD or Blu-ray, I would have it here, because I really dug that movie, but I have only ever seen bootlegs of it, and I happened to find it on YouTube, so I was like, well, screw that, I'm just going to watch it on YouTube. I would totally buy it, though, if I could find it officially. Again, low budget, uses its low budget to its advantage. I like that it strips away everything supernatural. I love the music. I love seeing what Australia looked like in that time period. I like that version of Dorothy, too. I like the fact that it's a more explicitly adult take on the story. I was genuinely surprised at how few, there are some darker adaptations of the story, which we're going to get to in a bit. I was surprised at how they were relatively few and far between, and even then, they were a little less explicit than I was expecting. I was expecting a hard R version of Oz. I didn't really get that. Even a rock and roll road movie, that version of Oz, it was, I would call that 70s R, because you that would totally get a PG-13 nowadays. Because like I said, the Love Guru, that's far more explicit than anything in Oz, a Rock and Roll Road movie. I like that it was stripped down, and I like that it was more about preserving the structure of the 1939 film, because that movie is so well structured. And I like that it was able to tell its own rock and roll story. And that's really what it is. It's more of a product of its time. Number 7 is Ozland. Yeah, this was a diamond in the rough, if ever there was one. It's only got, 2 main stars. They had a woman's voice on a recording, and they had someone in a robot suit and that kind of stuff. Maybe they had another person who was a flying monkey in a vision. That's about it. I mean, this is a very bare bones movie, but in the best possible way. This is how you use a low budget to your advantage, and this is how you make something that's really pretty moving and pretty powerful on virtually no money. Now, I don't know what the budget was exactly, but like I'm saying, relative to other, it's not Oz the Great and Powerful, which obviously had millions and millions of dollars. But this strips everything down to the bare minimum, and what's here is amazing work. I was so glad that this was as good as it was, because I really did want to give some shout outs to some lesser known works, and I was able to do that with Ozland. Absolutely amazing work. You can find this. I bought this off of eBay. The studio Shendopen, the writer-director Michael Williams has his own eBay store, so this is fairly easy to find. The DVD you can find as well, but highly, highly recommend this movie. I want Oztober to hopefully help inspire a next wave of movies like this from the next generation of filmmakers, because it is so highly personal. Number 6 is the 1986 anime version of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which, look at that. I got a physical copy in my possession because I had been watching it on YouTube. Someone had uploaded it, but I was like, you know what? I better grab a physical copy of this, because I don't... With when anything that's uploaded to YouTube, it's not... What's there today may be gone tomorrow, so you can't rely on it. But this show is probably the best of the adaptations, at least of the first book. And even the changes that they make, like, because they had Tip and Mombi introduced in the first story arc, which they don't appear in the books, but they do that as a way to plant the seed for where the story is going to go, which is pretty smart. So I think in terms of adaptations, but telling the full scope of Oz in a series, this probably is the best, even more so than the 1939 film. That one is great as far as like a singular one and done movie, but as far as like the whole world of Oz, this really is kind of the gold standard. The animation is just really pleasant to look at. It's a very pleasant series. This release, I got this off of eBay because I tried to buy it off of Amazon. The Japanese original with the subtitles, that one was still available to be sold for like $30 or something. This one is the English dub. This one, I don't know if it went out of print or something, because it was going for like $100, and I was like, what happened between now and then? I found this on eBay for $60, which is more than I wanted to spend, but it was like, I better grab this before it becomes even more expensive. But it actually came with the slip, which is pretty cool. But anyway, yeah, highly, highly recommend this series. I would argue as an adaptation, it's more faithful than the 1939 film. Even though the 1939 film, it combines and shortens things for the sake of a singular movie. But this just shows you in television form and extended storytelling form just how big the world of Oz really is. And it's just a great series. It's really, the storytelling is really good. I mean, it's why people fell in love with the books in the first place, and it's executed really, really well. So number 5 is Tin Man. That's right. This one ranks up highly because, again, I liked those kind of darker, more adult takes on the Oz universe. And I say darker, more adult because I saw this when I was like 16. I probably could have seen this at a younger age, so it's not that dark and it's not that adult, such that like you could probably show a kid this and it'd probably be okay. But again, relatively speaking, this is definitely one of the darker takes on the story, and I really like that. I love Zooey Deschanel. I love the cast. I love the overall execution. I love the fact that it's not just a simple remake. It's not just a simple reboot. It is Oz in the future. This was the first one that I can remember that really talked about Oz in the future, not counting the Wonderful Galaxy of Oz, but like this got me thinking about, oh gee, what would Oz be like in the future? Would it progress in a way that similar to how our world progressed? Because that's always something that's kind of amazing about, like, say, Star Wars, how that's space fantasy, admittedly, but you've got like 1,000 generations. For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights have been the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic. Well, it's like technologically, the world of Star Wars progresses very slowly. It's kind of shocking because it's you got people in ships and they're flying around the galaxy at unbelievable speeds, and yet technology progresses so slow. Then meanwhile, a fantasy world like Oz, it can be pretty fantastical, and yet Dorothy, she went there and everything happened the way that we saw it happen in the book and that kind of stuff. So I think that's pretty cool that this series did that. Visual effects wise, this is definitely late 2000s Sci-Fi Channel, but knowing that that's the case, again, you could have had a lot worse. This does not look like an Asylum production or anything. It looks quite a bit better than that. And they did have a pretty darn good assembly of talent relative to the time. Yeah, I really liked the directions that this took. I liked how history repeated itself a little bit, but it wasn't just a simple one-to-one comparison. I don't know. It really spoke to me at the time and still to this day. Obviously, Brian Lowry didn't like it, but, My Invisible Girlfriends are coming to his house, so... number 4 is Emerald City. Yeah, the series that nobody's apparently watched and nobody remembers. I really like this series a lot. It was a toss-up between this and Tin Man. Tin Man has the nostalgia factor. I think objectively Emerald City is better because, well, it's made 10 years later, the technology's better, the sets, the costumes, the overall production value is much stronger. I think I would argue it takes more risks. I think it has more to say. It's deeper. I do think it's darker visually. It's darker thematically. It's more adult in its orientation, but again, not too adult because it is still airing on NBC. It's not HBO or anything. But Adria Arjona, she's one of the best Dorothys by far. Not too hard to look at either, but this show actually has some of the most absolutely stunning women in it. You got Dorothy, and the witches are beautiful. Ozma's beautiful. I mean, they're absolutely stunning to look at, and they do a great job too. I'm surprised again. With a lot of the trying to raise up kind of more socially aware movies and shows and that kind of stuff, and speaking to the experiences of people that don't normally get talked about. I'm surprised that you don't hear more about the fact that this is like the first Ozma/Tip that actually dives into some of the transgender aspects of the character. Now, granted, it's not like front and center in the way that it would be if, like I said in the video, I do want to see that version of the story. I want to see an actual trans author write a book about that experience through the eyes of Ozma. I think that'd be really fascinating. I think that'd make for a great work. So again, it's a part of a larger story, but in its own way, it's like they handle it pretty respectfully, and I think that they dive into a lot of really interesting things about Ozma without having to make it like a big message show or anything like that. It's done more subtly than that, but I don't know. I'm just surprised that it doesn't get talked about more. Maybe it does. I don't know. I'm not really plugged into that world, but I hope so, because I think it was worth it. I liked the visual design. I like the overall feel of the world. It's not necessarily for everyone if you only like the light, fluffy version of the story and you don't like a kind of darker take on it. But I don't know. I like dark versions of things, and I think this is definitely one of the best ones. And I like Tarsem Singh in general. I love the cell. I like his general aesthetic. I think he's a talent. All right, number 3 is Amazon's Lost in Oz. Man, what an addictive show this was. Yeah, I did not expect it to be anywhere near as good as it was, but man, I was obsessed with that show. I mean, some people, they get obsessed with like Lost and Twin Peaks and Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad and that kind of stuff. And I've been obsessed with, shows like that in my own fashion. Lost in Oz, maybe because of just the overall fervor that I experienced while trying to research this show. I was just impressed at how many. It's just such a good series for kids. It's really smart and it's well written, and the voice actors do a great job. The animation is beautiful, and just the fact that it doesn't talk down to kids, it treats them with respect. It raises the bar for children and for children's entertainment, and and I've never heard of this show prior to doing this. I've never heard one person speak about this show, which again, like I said in the video, I don't know many people with kids, but even then, I doubt that they've necessarily seen it, or maybe they have, I don't know. But like, I was just like, man, I have got to help get the word out about this show, and please make a third season. I mean, I know technically it was season 2, like, they did kind of wrap it up, so like, but they left a little room to where you could probably tell more stories, but if they didn't, then yeah, it ended on a satisfying note. But I would love for there to be a third season. I want there to be a third season because I want more of these versions of the characters, and I want more good quality writing like this. So, please. All right, number 2 is Return to Oz. Now, one thing, okay, number 2 is this. Number 1, obviously, is the 1939 film. Duh. I mean, what else was it going to be? Come on. What else could possibly be number 1 but the 1939 film? It's a cultural landmark. It's one of the greatest films of any genre ever. It ranks so high in world cinema, in American cinema. It's a pop culture phenomenon. It's practically worshipped. I mean, I could talk for 10 hours about it, and I could take a whole separate deep dive into just that movie. That's how great it is. I mean, it's so great that it's like you would be hard pressed finding someone who hasn't seen the 1939 film. So, okay, that's number 1. There you go. Number 2 is Return to Oz. And in many ways, this movie does things that are better. It does things better than the 1939 film, or at least it does things just as good, but just in a different way. That's why I brought up the A New Hope versus The Empire Strikes Back kind of comparison. I like Fairuza Balk as Dorothy more. I like this version of Oz probably the best out of any of the Oz adaptations because this one looks the closest to the books realized in live action. Just a lot of little things that always bugged me about the 1939 film is that you've got the lion is like this bipedal humanoid lion thing rather than an actual lion on 4 legs and that kind of stuff. But again, you only see the lion a little bit at the end. I would have liked to have seen Oz realized in this style in more than just one movie, with Fairuza Balk as Dorothy and that kind of stuff. I would have loved to have seen that, but just what we got, I thought was so good. I love Jack Pumpkinhead. I love the way that the Scarecrow looks. I love that version of the Tin Man. I don't know. This movie, again, so criminally underrated, so criminally underappreciated. I will say the 1939 film objectively is the best just because it has the cultural real estate. It has history. It's influenced like everyone in the world practically. So obviously how can this possibly topple that? But in terms of like personal favorites, I might give it to Return to Oz. But again, objectively, I'd have to give it to the 1939 film. But like the stuff that is good in this movie to me is just unbelievably good. I mean, Dorothy in here is she has so much complexity, and Fairuza Balk can pull it off in a way that would be challenging for an adult actor to do. And again, I don't think she gets enough credit for her performance here or her later performances as an adult. I think she's a very criminally underrated actress. And I mean, just what it has to say about life is that life is not always kind. It's not always pleasant. It's not always horrible either, because this has some nice moments in it as well. Although I do love the fact that the cover is so rosy happy. It's got the rainbow. It's, it makes it look like it's a lot happier than it really is. I would say out of all the adaptations, this one's probably the darkest visually and the darkest thematically, and aimed at kids, which is the funny part. But, I thought that what it had to say, it must have gone over so many critics' heads. They just wanted the second one. They wanted the first one again, the 1939 film. They wanted that again, basically. But that's not what this was. This was a much more adult, mature statement about, life is not always kind. It's not always pleasant. And when you're growing up, you have to face a lot of things that you didn't ask for but get thrust upon you anyway, and it's how you deal with trauma and with crisis and with life taking things from you, and you have to hold on to who you really are. You have to survive. You have to protect yourself from people trying to destroy your identity and your imagination. Like that really connects with me. That's a really personal story for me. And it's communicated so well in this movie. It's just, people don't see that, and it's really sad. So I hope that I've helped to bring forward exactly what about this film touched me so much on a personal level. Yeah, it can be dark, it can be scary, it can be, any which way, but it's like, again, life is not always pleasant. It's not always nice. And it's good that Dorothy learns that in not only the real world, but in Oz as well. Oz is not always pleasant and nice, which it wasn't in the 1939 film either. But it's just, you have to have aspects of both. You have to have aspects of childhood imagination, but also of adult maturity. You have to bridge the two, and she learns that in this. And I don't know. To me, that's a really profound message. It really touched me on a very deep level, and I have to give it credit for that. And again, I have to dispute the whole like, oh, this is a sequel thing. I'm kind of acting like it is, but no, it's not. I don't think, because again, the only thing that carries over is the ruby slippers. Other than that, iconographically wise, it's connected much more to the books. Some people might fight me on that, but whatever. So there you have it, folks. We have officially ranked Oztober Year 1. Hopefully you enjoyed that bonus video, and stay tuned for a few more bonus things coming your way in the days to come.